Hi guys, in this video we're going to take a quick look at how to do still image renders and how to do a batch render for an animated sequence. So let's start off with a basic render. In order to get a basic render, what we want to do is use the render current frame button to render a single frame image. Okay, so we can click this button just here and it will pop open the render view window and it will generate the image. The render view window can also be opened using this icon just here. So this is a quick way of creating a single image and saving the file out. And we can also generate a single image from the settings, which I'll show you in a second. So the image is finished rendering. You can see there it took 27 seconds. Now if I want to save this, what I can do is go to File. Now note that this is the File menu in the render view. It's not the main File menu up here. It's a completely different menu. So we go Render View, File, Save Image, and you can see a sequence I've already got here. And basically what you can do is select your file type from the drop down and you give the file a name. So I might just save this as Sushi Guy Demo and you hit save, and that will now show up in your images folder and it'll be right down the end there. There it is there, and it looks like that. So that's a single image render. Okay, so now let's take a look at doing a single image render from the render settings. So if I pop open the render settings, which is this button just here, or this button just here in the render view, okay, here we are. What we can do is set the frame animation extension here to maybe name .extension single frame, and what this will do is just render a single frame. It will still use this format just here, whichever sort of file name you've got typed in here, this image format, and so on. Now in order to render this, what we need to do is come over to the rendering menu set just here, rendering, and we can go to render, batch render just here, or you can use the rendering tab and we've got a batch render button which is just here, batch render. So if I click that, note that it'll go into the same images folder. So if I click that, it'll save the file out and export it into the Mental Ray rendering engine, which is kind of a separate sort of background application that's now running. And basically the software will automatically save the file into that folder. And you'll see down here it'll say rendering with Mental Ray, so it's kind of exporting the scene file into Mental Ray, and it'll start generating the image in a second. So technically it should use, there it goes, so it's starting to render that now. Okay, there it goes. So 35% done. So technically it should use this file name, sg_frame_, and it should be a JPEG. So we're now at 65% finished, 70. Now keep in mind, if you're rendering an animated sequence, this percentage is for the single frame that it's rendering. Okay, so that just finished. And if we take a look here, it's probably going to be right at the beginning maybe. Yep, there it is, sg_frame_. And it's, you can see there, that's the same image. So that's two different ways of rendering a single image frame. Now if you want to render a sequence, an animated sequence like this one I've already got, basically you use this process, okay, that I've done here, but you need to make sure that the frame animation extension is not set to single frame. So in that case you'd put it back down to say name number .extension, or name underscore number dot extension. The number, once again, is the frame number. Okay, so something like that perhaps. And you need to make sure you've got your start and end frame numbers set to whatever the duration of your animation is. So if your animation is 200 frames like mine, you need to set the start frame at 1 and the end frame at 200. If you only want to render out part of your animation, let's say frame 60 to frame 150, then you type in 60 and 150 and it'll just render those frames. Okay, so in order to render this sequence out as it's set up here, you'll notice at the top here, you should always check this detail at the top. The path is where it's going to save to, so it's going to go into my images folder. It's going to name the frames in this manner, and it will render from frame 001 to frame 200. The image size it's rendering at is just here. Okay. Now, in order to render this image sequence, what we need to do is a batch render again. So once again, it's the batch render button here in the rendering tab, batch render, or once again up to render, batch render, just here. Now, if we go in the options for batch render, okay, you'll see that we've got some options for render threads. Okay, now normally by default this will be set to automatic, and this will be set to automatic. All right, the memory limit. Now, you can actually basically manually enter the number of threads you want. So the number of threads basically is the number of processors in your system, in your CPU. So my computer has 8. So if I turn this off, I can tell the computer to use all 8 threads or all 8 cores to render my my image. Now that should speed the render up. I can also tell it manually to render using this amount of RAM from my system. Okay. Now, you may not necessarily know how much RAM your system has. Okay. There is a way of actually kind of calculating this, but it's not in this panel, which is kind of weird. I'm not too sure why they've done it this way, but if we go to render current frame options, so this button here is basically this little clapperboard button. If we go to render current frame and hit options, we get almost the same panel. Okay, you can see that it's got pretty much all the same settings with one difference. There's actually a calculation button here for the memory limit. So if I press calculate, this tells me that I can use basically up to 11.8 gigabytes of memory. Now I have 16 gigabytes of memory in my machine, and basically I could use sort of 11.8. Okay, and you can see that these numbers are slightly different, and that's because this number was the one I used last time, the last job I was doing, and I had a different amount of software running. I've got screen capture software, and I've got various bits of software running. So it's calculating the numbers slightly differently because of that. But basically what you can do is calculate here and then copy and paste that number over here. And then just close this one. And you can batch render and close here to trigger off the rendering. Now, when you press this, it'll do the same thing as it just did before. You'll see it'll say rendering with mental ray down here, and then it will start to count down the percentage for each frame that it renders. Now, a render of 200 frames might take a couple of hours, okay, or several hours to render, based on your render settings and so on. So basically, you let it go until it says rendering completed. Okay, now I'm not going to render this because I don't have several hours, and I've already rendered one. So when the render is done, you will basically find in your images folder your entire rendered sequence like this. Okay, individual frames. Now keep in mind, this is based on the file format that you choose over here. Now I've chosen JPEG, so what I've got is basically a folder full of JPEGs. Now I'm just going to get rid of the additional little renders that aren't part of the sequence, just to clean this up a bit. So I'm just going to call this folder work in progress, and I'm going to drop those kind of additional non-sequence frames into there. Yep. So I'll just cut that and paste them. There we go. So basically in this folder now, what I've got is my image sequence. Okay, so it goes all the way up to frame 200, and you can see that that image there. Okay. Now, what you'll find often is, depending on the version of the software you're using, I'm finding, sometimes you'll have the option of rendering maybe a QuickTime movie or maybe an AVI file out of here. I have seen that in the past, but generally speaking, when you're rendering a sequence, you are always better off rendering images. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, if you want a completely uncompressed file that you might put into, say, After Effects or something like that, you can render uncompressed file types. Okay, now a JPEG that I've used for this test purpose is a compressed file type, but you know, you might use something like a PSD sequence or something like that, or an EXR sequence. The second reason you should render as images is if the software gets turned off or there's a power failure, something like that, like if someone comes and shuts everything down, for example, while you're away from your computer, any file that has already rendered, any frame that has rendered already, has already been saved and exported out and saved into your folder before the computer renders the next frame. So it renders a frame, saves the file, renders a frame, saves the file, and so on and so on and so on. If you're rendering in a video format like AVI or QuickTime, it will render every frame before it saves the file. So it renders frame 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to the end of your sequence. Then it exports the file, saves it. So if someone turns your computer off, and let's say you're up to frame 199 of 200 frames, and you've been rendering for 5 hours, someone comes in and turns the power off, or there's a power cut or something like that, something happens, basically you lose the entire render and you've got to start rendering from the start again, right back at frame 1. You have no way of actually recouping those lost frames that have already been finished. So it's always best to render as image frames rather than video. Okay, so what do we do with those frames once we've got them? Let's first of all grab our file just there. What I'm going to do is jump across to After Effects. Now I'm not a video editor, so I don't use kind of video editing software, Premiere or Final Cut Pro or whatever, but you certainly can use those software packages for this process. I do use a bit of After Effects, so I'm comfortable with this. So what we can do basically is, the way that I do this is I get After Effects open, and if I've already got my folder open, which oftentimes I do because, you know, I might be copying and pasting, you know, texture files and stuff into my project folder, you know, reference files and things like that, I'll generally have my project folder open. So I can very quickly here just go straight into images. So what I personally do is I'll grab a frame, you know, one of these files from the folder, and I'll drag it into the project bin just here in After Effects. And that will basically load the file in. Now what that's done is it's made After Effects basically look at that folder by default. So what I can do now is just delete this file because I don't need it. What I need to do is import the entire sequence. So now when I go to File, Import File, or Control-I, it'll go straight to the folder that previous file was in, which is where all of my sequence is. Like that. So that way I don't have to navigate through my PC, through all my drives and my folders, looking for this folder. It goes straight there. So it's a little bit of a shortcut for navigating to your sequence. So what we do is we select the first frame. We need to make sure that we've got import as footage, okay, just here. Now that's the only option at this point, okay. And we also need to make sure that sequence is switched on. Now, it's automatically detecting that this is a JPEG, all right? So it's saying format is JPEG, and it's got JPEG sequence. If these were PSDs, it would say PSD sequence. Older versions of After Effects don't have this ticked automatically. So you have to double check that this is ticked. If it's not, it will just import the frame that you have selected. All right, we've got sequence. Let's hit open. There's our sequence. Now, if you double click this, it'll open it up in the work area here. Okay, and you can scrub through to kind of see that animation. It's just a turntable. Okay, so you can see that's the footage we're going to deal with. Let's just switch that off. So what we need to do to create an actual video file for this is we need to create a composition for this. So you could, for example, go up to composition and, you know, new composition and set the settings up and so on, you know, make sure everything's set up here so it matches this, you know, duration and pixel size and everything, resolution. Quicker way of doing it is grabbing this sequence, dragging it down onto the new composition button just here, and it will automatically size the composition and set the duration to the footage that you drag in. So it's really quick. Okay, and that will give you your sequence ready to be exported essentially. Now at a more advanced level, you know, you might want to go in and double check the, if I right click in here, composition settings, you might want to check your frame rate, make sure that matches. So, you know, I know that my frame rate was 25 in Maya, you know, for example, so, you know, I could set that to 25. Keep in mind that because I'm changing the frame rate after I've created the document, it's automatically kind of messing with the durations down here. So, you know, for this example, I'm not too fussed with this, but you can set the frame rate in here. Also note that After Effects is a bit of a pain in this regard. You have a frame rate for your composition, but there's also a frame rate set for the footage when you import it, and you can actually see that here. Note that this sequence, okay, just here, has been imported at a frame rate of 30 frames a second. Now, when I animated it in Maya, it was 25 frames a second. Okay, but because it came in at individual picture frames don't have a frame rate embedded in them. So it's set it to 30 frames. But here's the issue. Even if I set my composition to 25 frames, the footage is still 30. Here's where you need to adjust this. So if we go to Edit Preferences, okay, inside the preferences, there's actually a setting for the frame rate for imported sequences. Now, if I go to Import, you can see here, sequence footage. It's set to 30 frames a second by default. Okay, now keep in mind 30 frames a second, that's American television, approximate American television frame rate. We're not in America and we're not necessarily doing this for TV per se. So what you need to do before you import your footage, really you should set After Effects up in a way that's suitable for your region or your area or the job that you're doing. So for me, I'd set this to 25. Now keep in mind, that's not going to change this because I've already imported this footage. Okay, that's a setting that's set when you import. Now if I import this again, well, we can maybe check to see what happens. So if I bring that in again, you can see that that's imported at a frame rate of 25 frames per second. So you need to be aware After Effects is not necessarily going to set your frame rates up for you. You need to check and make sure that they're correct. So, you know, if you create a new, you know, like a new sequence, now I know that this, based off my settings over in Maya, is a 960 by 540. So if I type in 960 here, like that, I get 540 at the bottom because lock aspect ratio to 16 by 9 is active, so that's going to give me that. I've got frame rate of 25. Now I don't know what the duration of this footage is at the moment. I can't remember. Hang on, I'll just OK that. If I click here, columns, media duration, just there. If you turn that on, you can actually see that the media duration for this sequence, which is this one here, is 8 seconds. Just there. Alright. So that's composition 1, which is this. And you can see that that's set to 1424. Now if I drag my 25 frames per second sequence in, like that, you can see that the duration is double, almost double what it needs to be. And I know that it's an 8-second footage, so what I can do is go into my composition. So if I right click on it and hit composition settings, I can just change this to 0800, like that, and that will readjust. So if you want to be really precise and get everything sorted out how you should, you need to double check those frame rates, check your preferences, double check your duration and your resolution of a composition that you've created. If you just want to import it real quick and export it out just so you can watch it and you're not fussed with the frame rate, then just import the sequence, drag it onto this button, and then you export it. The export's really quick. Basically what we do is activate whichever composition we want. So I might do my proper composition with the correct frame rates and so on. And we go to composition, add to render queue, and then what we do is set our settings up. So pretty much by default you can leave best settings alone. We can select the output module just here. I want to create probably a QuickTime, and I want to set it to an MPEG-4 video just here. Now, you know, technically you guys could you know, select any of your formats that you want to do. You know, you might do a H.264, for example. Okay. You know, the format's up to you, whatever is suitable for what you're working on. All right. For me, you know, like I could go MPEG-4, for example. That's another way of doing it. But for me, I'm going to go QuickTime MPEG-4. Quality value is 100, so you can see everything's just maxed out. No keyframes. And I'm ready to go. Now, if you've got audio, you need to tick audio output. If you've got some music or something. Okay. I don't, so I don't need to worry about that. Just hit OK. Then you need to output it. So you have to click here, give it a name, and navigate to where you need to store it. I'm going to drop it on the desktop, and I'll just call this SG for Sushi Guy 360 demo. Just hit save, and then you need to press the render button over here. After Effects will render really quickly. You get the little chime, and basically your video file is ready to be watched, if you can find it. There it is there. So I might render the... I'll open this with VLC. Get rid of that update. And just loop it. And you can see now that video has been exported. So that's how we render from Maya. That's how we export our image sequences, and how we create a video file from them using, in this case, After Effects. But as I said, you can use any video editing software or compositing software that you can import sequences and export video from. So with that said, I'll leave this here, and I'll see you next time.